On this episode of the Dialogue podcast, we actually talk about something that's kind of a hot topic within the Christian community, and it's the idea of deconstruction. You hear that word a lot, and it's kind of thrown around. What does it mean? What does it mean for you? And if you're in the process of deconstructing your faith or trying to figure out what you believe, I think this is going to be a really great episode for you. So check it out. Hey, welcome to this episode of the Dialogue podcast. Greg Ford, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here. Weather's nice. We're in Ohio, and it's I've developed an appreciation for the oscillation between rain and sun. It used to be
I see you have a light rain jacket on over.
I wanted all sun back in the day, but now that I'm an emerging landscaper. Why are you looking at me like that? Huh?
Tell the people more about your emerging landscaping.
I'm not a one-man show. I've got a wing woman. Her name's Shaylyn.
No, that's me.
She recently planted a wisteria vine.
I do love a good
pruned
wisteria.
back some trees and planted some knockout rose bushes, among other things. I shouldn't have started. It's like thanking people at the Oscars. You start naming people and you're going to leave people out.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave plants out, but the bottom line is
the azalea bush, the viburnum, I would like to thank the ground cover, all of it.
Exactly. So we've really gone all out with that. So when I see forecast of rain, sun,
you're kind of excited about it, actually.
I'm excited because I know the blooms are going to come in so strong.
Blooming.
I can hear them blooming.
Yes.
It's powerful stuff.
That is our hostas. If you want to talk about something like, this is not a gardening podcast, but we're going to go ahead and take 2 seconds on gardening because, hey, everybody, it's spring when this is being recorded. We have this, I don't even know what type of hosta
the
is. The
species of hosta should have gigantor.
It's like out of Jurassic Park.
Yeah, it's like the dinosaur hosta.
Yeah, like it's a prehistoric hosta. This thing is monstrous. And it will literally go from barely sticking out of the ground to leaves that are like almost as long as your arm in a week.
For context, if you're watching, our hostas get about as big as this table.
Maybe bigger,
right? And they go from these, they like come out of the ground like torpedoes.
They do. Within a matter of a few days, it's like you went from this to they're this tall, and then they unfurl like ta-da.
Yeah. So long story short, I like seeing rain and sun in the forecast because I know we're going to get all that. Mm-hmm. And so I feel good. How about you?
That is the nice thing, by the way, about like finding some sort of silver lining in a situation when you start a new activity that makes you appreciate things you didn't like before. Because you used to hate rain, but now you're kind of like, I'm kind of excited about rain. Yep. There's a life lesson in there.
That's a word. It's a word.
What's going on with me? I'm just spending a bunch of time outside pulling weeds and planting things. It's kind of taken over my life lately.
Doing life.
I did my first highway driving with our daughter, who just got her not license.
How did she merge? Temporary.
Her temps. Her permit. There we go. Her permit.
How was her merge game?
Very good. Very good. I was actually shocked. I'm not going to lie. I was completely terrified of driving on the highway with her, and then especially getting to areas that had like intersections with multiple lanes. Once we got to kind of the shopping area that we were going to, my heart was in my throat. Miles, our youngest, was backseat driving and was highly critical the entire time.
He has a critical spirit.
He is a little bit of a glass half empty kind of guy. So he had a lot of negative commentary for her in real time.
Nothing like a 9-year-old
negative Nelly
backseat driver with autism.
It's everything you would imagine it is and more.
Ella.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, it was rough. Thankfully she can laugh it off. Like she has a good sense of humor, so she was able to laugh about it and not be distracted, which was impressive. I kind of feel like if she can get used to driving with Hudson and Miles in the back seat, I will be so comfortable with her driving because like she started out with the ultimate distraction. It's like when they put the Cougar in the car with Ricky Bobby, on Talladega Nights, and you're like, if you can drive with this thing in the car, you're good.
Yeah.
It's kind of her
shout out to you
experience.
as a mom for taking that on, and it'd been easy to avoid that, but
it had to be done.
Yeah.
It's one of those things you got to just bite the bullet and do it. You've taken her out on a lot of good driving expeditions.
I have, and by the way, if people hear a sound in the background, it's
mowing.
Lovely
It is
sound
spring.
of the weed whacker.
That's
out
right.
there.
Like we said.
That's sounds of summer. But yeah, I've taken her out driving, and
I think
it's definitely it creates a little anxiety, but
Yeah.
I try to be cool about it.
Yeah.
I try to not be giving her any more anxiety than she needs.
Yeah, that's the hard part, is like trying not to do the like,
Yeah.
watch out kind
Yeah.
of thing, because that makes it worse.
Mhm.
But there are times where you're like, I need you to immediately listen to the sound of my voice and hit the brake. Okay, so moving on. Actually, I'm going to go a little bit back to in a previous episode when we had a bunch of people write in. Boy, that weed whacker is right there. We had a bunch of people like commenting via Instagram and Facebook and telling us some things that they wanted us to talk about. And we had talked about several of them. I had brought up some of the topics that we had heard multiple times. But the one that I actually was very surprised by, the number one thing that we got multiple times, was people asking questions around deconstructing their faith.
Okay.
And not entirely, some people entirely deconstructing it and walking away, but for the most part, it was people talking about kind of dismantling old belief systems that they were not sure were correct. Maybe they had not interpreted things. They had been raised in a certain situation and they weren't sure that was right. And then how do you navigate from there? Because now you've just got this empty space where you took something apart. And so I thought, this is kind of a hard one, I think, to go into, but I think it's actually an area that you and I can be helpful, you in particular, but hopefully I can add a few things that are of value as well, around helping people understand, that deconstructing doesn't mean that you have to be left with this empty hole. You can take apart something that you're like, you know what? I think maybe I grew up with a misinterpreted version of something and I need to let it go. Or I believed something was sacred when really, like you describe in the Wesleyan quadrilateral, it wasn't. You don't have to be left with an open hole. You can reconstruct. You can reconstruct with something that is actually healthy and whole and is a more correct interpretation. So you want to dive into this?
So I'll start talking here, and then that's a gigantic, humongous
Exactly.
conversation.
So we can take it piece by piece.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start it, and then if you have follow-up questions, or if, I don't know if people sent more specific questions. That's kind of like when you say, what do you think about deconstruction? It's like, what do you think about science? It's like,
it's really
there's a lot there.
sciencey.
Okay, so let me start with this. I was talking to a guy one time he's like an engineer-minded person, and trained as an engineer, and he's probably 60 years old. And when he was a teenager is when computers really started becoming a thing. And his parents bought him one, and of course they were extremely expensive. Well, I mean, they're still expensive, but
Right.
Whatever, a couple $1,000s or whatever it costs, and at that time even would have been
It
more
wasn't
than
a mass to
2,000
market thing
now,
yet.
right? So they buy him this computer. Again, picture those old computers, the big box and all this.
Giant desktop.
And he's just like fascinated, like, what in the world? How does this work? How does this thing come up on the screen? So he took the entire thing apart. Like the entire thing apart. Didn't tell his parents, just wanted to see all the parts and how they worked. And so his parents didn't even know he was doing this. They walk in his room, and this $2,000 computer is in a million
Shambles.
pieces on the floor, and they freak out. They're like, what in the heck are you doing? And he's like, I'll put it back together. I just want to understand it. I want to know how it works. And he did put it back together, and it did work.
Wow.
But he wanted to understand every part. He didn't want to just sit here and look at this screen and think it's some magic trick behind the screen. Right. I want to understand what's going on. So when you hear deconstruction, I think a lot of people hear the word destruction.
Yes.
I want to just destroy something. I want to which is kind of probably what his parents thought he was doing. And I think some people, that might be their intention. Hey, I'm a cynic.
And I just want to smash this to bits.
For a lot of logical reasons, they might have hurt related to religion, or people that are hypocritical, or people that hurt them, and so they want to tear this thing down. And then I think there's some very sincere people that are like, I've been looking at this screen, and people have been telling me a little bit of what's behind it. I really want to understand it. So I'm going to take it apart, and then I'm going to reconstruct. And of course, that's where the analogy breaks down a little bit, because he deconstructed and reconstructed exactly as it was. It may be reconstructed or rebuilt.
Yeah, I understand your point.
A little bit different. And so I think that process is beautiful personally. I have a lot of grace personally for people who sincerely seek, that are really, really wanting to actually believe something instead of just taking, a belief system that was handed to them. I'm a pastor's kid, so, faith in Jesus was the centerpiece of our family. And when you're at that age, and of course, I'm the last guy in the world who gets to would ever want to complain about his family, because I have wonderful family, loving parents. They created a safe environment for me. I knew unconditional love from day one. And so I'm very, very grateful. But when you have parents who are Christians, and that's not just like some label, it really is a fully integrated operating system.
Yeah.
They're giving you something, and they're saying not only, hey, this is our family identity. This is not only a family heirloom. We got this from God. God gave us this to give to you.
Yeah.
And if you do have a safe, loving set of parents or church or environment, it feels almost disrespectful or dishonoring to mess with the antique, to do anything to it, to question it.
Right.
Even sincerely, to go, what is this? It feels almost like you're dishonoring something that's very precious. And so I kind of have my own journey of like giving myself permission to sincerely take the computer apart. And I've done that. I'm doing that all the time. I'm trying to really get to the heart of the truth and learn and see things I didn't see. And certainly, every generation is building on what they've been given. And I sure hope my daughter or people in our church or whoever comes after us sees things we didn't see. So I encourage people to take that journey, to take it, I would say, with some self-awareness around, why am I doing this? Am I doing this? Do I have like a conclusion that I'm wanting to come to, or I'm doing this because I'm ticked off or from a wound or whatever that might be? If you could get to a healthy place, I think, man, there's a whole lot to be learned, from that journey. So it doesn't scare me at all. I encourage people to do that.
I think the point you made about people just assume that deconstruction is destruction is really, really valuable, because I think people get really scared when they hear it and they immediately freak out and think this person is running the opposite direction. Not necessarily. The example you gave with the computer, maybe here's one that's, at least for me, feels a little more like apples to apples. Miles has, he's really into Legos right now. And so Miles has some of these Lego sets that the same pieces, if you take them apart, you can rebuild it into a completely different configuration. If you put it together this way, it's building a camera. If you put it together this way, it's building a flower in a flower pot, right? And so I think that being able to go, I'm not throwing out these parts. I'm not just chucking this in the trash. What I'm doing is I'm taking it apart and I'm making sure, are there any pieces in here that don't belong to this set? They shouldn't even be in here. Am I configuring this in the right way? Am I putting the pieces where they go? Or did I build something completely different from what it was supposed to be? It kind of reminds me, is it Reggie White? Mm-hmm. Is that who? We watched this documentary on him, and I think he's a really interesting example of someone who took that kind of a deconstruction process, where he always was this, man who was really known for his faith, and he had strong faith in God, and he was very vocal about his religious stances on things. And he got to a point later in his life after he retired from his football career. He was an NFL football player, NFL great. And he realized, I think I've made a bunch of assumptions about what these scriptures mean, just kind of based on what I grew up being told, or kind of a surface reading of things. That was my initial interpretation of it. And so I took that as gospel and ran with it. And he said, I think I need to learn more. And so he actually went and got a tutor who was helping him learn to read in Hebrew. And I think he eventually planned on being able to, read things in Greek and whatever as well. So that he was actually understanding the original text, and he was starting to get a fuller understanding of even what that language meant back in the day. And unfortunately, he passed away in the middle of that process. Mm-hmm. But you could tell that it was a really beautiful, meaningful process for him, where he was like, it's not about me wanting to throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's about me wanting to actually have the truest, fullest understanding about what this actually says and means, and how it can apply to my life, and not just assuming that kind of our modern cultural interpretations of something are accurate.
Mm-hmm. So let me throw this out. So one of the things I've noticed that has evolved in my own head as I've aged, when I was younger, we'll say the first 40 years of my life, I was really motivated, and when I thought about goals, my goals were extrinsic rewards. So let's say, for example, why would I do a podcast? And we would say, well, we do a podcast because I want to increase our influence. I want to be able to reach more people. I want to be able to build something, right? And so I would have thought, hey, as we're doing this, the value of what we're doing, I would have seen primarily as what's produced from it, what's the fruit that comes from it, which again, we would have looked at the numbers, and we do, actually we don't really look at the numbers on this. I look at a lot of numbers in my life because I think they matter.
There are people that are.
Yeah, I don't know I actually don't know what the numbers are on this right now. At some point we will, but my point is, that would have been a huge part of the equation as I'm measuring my time and energy and resources. What am I going to do with my life? And I'm investing myself. So that when I thought about goals, SMART goals, measurable, okay, it was all related to extrinsic, whether it rewards or fruit, what's being produced.
Output.
As I've gotten older, it's intrinsic. So the value of this podcast is less about what number it's producing and more about, do I enjoy personally inside my own head and heart this? Mm-hmm. And that whole, thing, like if this wasn't rewarding just to be here doing this, regardless of the numbers, I don't think I would want to do it. Mm-hmm. Right. Unless it was really producing something, I have way less of a focus on that. And I probably have devalued some of that extrinsic stuff more. And now it's like I do stuff I really want to do. I just Zoomed earlier today with an organization I'm going to do some stuff with in the fall. And they were like, hey, we don't want to wear you out when you're here, but we kind of like you to do this, this, and this. And I told them, I'm like, at this point in my life, I say no to things that don't energize me. And I say yes to things that do. Not that everything I do is
the
exhilarating.
most energizing thing
right.
ever.
But like, if I wasn't excited about what I was doing there intrinsically, I wouldn't do it.
Right.
I would say, hey, no, sorry, I can't make it. But all that to say, to me, if only, our moms listened to this thing, but I really thoroughly enjoyed it and I was getting an intrinsic reward from it.
Right.
I'd keep doing it.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's worth more than whatever the metric on the back end or the monetary value that you get from it. The reason I bring that up is because I think when you're looking at deconstruction or going through and taking your beliefs apart and understanding them, I think when it's done right, it's a tremendous amount of intrinsic value and reward.
Yes.
And what does it bring?
Yeah.
I think it brings more peace. I think it brings deeper faith.
Yeah.
Because if all I do is take what's on the screen and I don't even know what's behind it.
Right.
And my, parents or my well-meaning people, my pastor told me that this is all back here. And now I'm just simply, in the game of phone, operator or whatever. Someone told me to tell you this and I'm just somewhere in the middle, but I don't really understand it. My belief is going to be pretty shallow.
Yeah.
So I think like that whole thing of going into it and like pay attention to the intrinsic impact, the intrinsic reward. I think if you're done right,
good.
like at first it can create a lot of turmoil internally because you're like, oh, am I allowed to do this? At least that was my experience.
No, same.
It was like, and I had to kind of go head brain for a minute to go, is there any question I can't ask God?
Right.
Is there anything I can't bring to God in prayer? Is there anything about God that God wouldn't want me to sincerely seek?
I was going to say, did it not say ask, seek, and knock? Like
100%. He rewards those who diligently seek him.
Yeah,
earnestly seek him. That's Hebrews 11:6.
So what seeking would there be left to do if we already have all the answers, the pat answers to just pass down to each other? You know what I mean?
That's
There's
right.
always more to discover.
So once I kind of got past that initial like feeling that I'm dishonoring what God gave my parents.
Yeah, grandma's heirloom.
Right? Like now I'm like, hey, this isn't disrespectful at all. In fact, it's quite honoring. In fact, it's I think what God wants, and not just so that at the end of it I can have some kind of extrinsic reward, like the feeling of, hey, I now have it all right. Now I know everything. No, the whole journey of taking, the computer apart, the whole journey of coming to peace about things and getting excited about what you just learned. And wait, I've always thought it was this, but it turns out that was a literary move that was being that turns out that's a way they did poetry in 3-3-3, and at the center is the thing. That means the center thing is the one that jumps out. It's like all of a sudden discovering this new poem. Oh, the whole thing was about mercy. Oh my goodness. The whole prayer was about forgiveness, because that stuff is exciting. Yeah. So outside of just going like, I'm now a more, bona fide theologian, is the actual joy of those discoveries. And I just think it's such a cool journey. I encourage everyone to get on it, but to do it from a place of understanding and greater faith and better beliefs and greater internal peace than with a chip on your shoulder. Yeah. And so I just want to be destructive. Right. I think that's the wrong approach. I don't think that energy is going to produce much peace or put you in a better place.
I was going to say, I don't think that ever produces anything good for anybody, to go into any situation from a place of just total bitterness. You're poisoning yourself. And I'm not, please hear me, if you've been through something horrible, I'm not saying you don't have a right to be angry.
Right.
I'm not saying that you don't have a right to your feelings and to work through those things. You do. You absolutely, there's, not only is there nothing wrong with you being upset over injustice if something like that was done, that is the appropriate response. We shouldn't tolerate things and brush things under the rug that are wrong. But there's a difference between going, this is wrong, and I'm going to call it wrong, and I'm going to remove myself from an unhealthy situation or whatever it may be, versus having this constant vengeful bitterness in you that wants to go back and get your own pound of flesh, and that wants to kind of just rip the whole thing down just because someone within a certain institution was negative to you, right? It's like if you had a bad teacher at school, well, that doesn't mean that like the entire school system stinks. Maybe you just had a really crappy teacher, right? So I know that's not a perfectly apples to apples, but you get my point. And so it's like, yes, that teacher should be dealt with, but that doesn't mean that we just like bulldoze the school. And so
or bulldoze education.
Or bulldoze education.
So it's a good point. Like it's valid. If you've been hurt, then you need to go through a process of healing.
Yes.
But when I'm broken, it's not the time to start painting the
Everything.
world with a broad brush.
Yes.
And so if you're going through a marriage and a broken heart and a divorce, that's probably not the time to draw conclusions about
relationships as a whole.
Women as a whole, or men as a whole, or marriage as a whole, or love as a whole,
Right.
That's where I think you end up in that pain. It becomes the loudest voice in your ear. It's probably not the best time. Now, if I go through a process of healing, now that life experience I have is a tremendous tool of wisdom to help me maybe come to a more mature, better belief about what love actually is, or what it takes to make a relationship work, and who I am, and all of that, right? 100%. And so I think when you're there, those experiences might really serve you well once you get through the healing process. But I think sometimes people who still have a chip on their shoulder, they still, for very plausible reasons, are angry, or they're in that hurt space, now launch into deconstruction, but they're doing so, with a full clip and just wanting to blow stuff up, So I have great empathy for that. I've got my own hurt in church in a variety of ways. So I get it. Like I'm not on one side of the argument. Like I could tell my own stories. Like I totally get it. But I think in general, even beyond deconstructing religion or faith or the Bible or whatever, is in general, you're going to do your best thinking when you're healthy.
That's right. When you're
healed.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with that. So you mentioned that being a tool, right? If you've come through that experience to a place of healing, that now you have wisdom in that space, and that can be a tool to help you through that process. What would you say are some tools that people can use if they're like, man, I'm at a place where I'm kind of wondering what's behind the computer screen, and I don't really know what to do next. I don't know how to do this in a way that is productive. What would you tell them?
So I would start with pace and expectations.
Okay.
So let's say you're 30 years old and you've been in church all your life, and now we're in the information age, and you're starting to get a hold of some content, or you saw a TikTok video, or you have a friend you sat down with who's like, this is not true, and this isn't true, and this was a lie, and whatever. If you're not careful, you can start with a sense of urgency bordering on a frenetic pace of like, oh
I gotta
man,
hurry up and blow this up.
I gotta figure this all out right now.
Yeah.
And so I think like the reality about the Bible is it is a complex book, 66 books written over 1,500 years.
Multiple authors.
On multiple continents. Okay. I mean,
different languages.
Different languages. You're talking like there's a lot in there, and it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's a lifetime of work. And so I think to start with like, hey, I'm going to take this journey one step at a time, one concept at a time, and not feel like I have to rush through and clean it all up, this year. But to start establishing some habits of learning, of listening, of contemplating and conversing, and listening to other people's voices and processing through your thoughts, and then continuing to do that. What are those rhythms? So, I mean, I think that first thing would be pace.
Yes.
If you're feeling frantic and like you got to get this all done by year end, you don't. And I would also say, I think, and again, I encourage people who are like, hey, I'm going to read through the Bible in a year. I always wonder a little bit what's behind that, which is, in a sense, it's kind of like they probably feel like I want to understand the whole Bible in a year. That's why I'm going to read it front to back. Like I'm going to read a novel front to back, and therefore I know the whole story. Well,
yeah,
that's probably not the best way to do that. But all that to say, my point, and I'm not discouraging anyone reading through the Bible.
I think a lot of people probably do it for the sake of the consistency that it kind of builds into their life. But you can build that consistency at a much slower pace. Yeah,
and I would say even again the approach being, so pace is number one. The second part is, I would say, really understanding and probably starting with a bit of a survey of the Bible. So understanding the genres, understanding more about how the Bible was written and why it was written. I've talked to our church recently about, I used the story of the Princess Bride and how it's a story about Princess Buttercup and Prince Humperdinck and Wesley and the Dread Pirate Roberts and the Six Fingered Man and the Andre the Giant and all this, right? But it's actually a story about a grandpa telling a grandson an epic story. So when you open up the Bible, wherever you're reading Matthew telling first century Jewish people a story about Jesus.
Right.
It's a grandpa, grandson, and then a wonderful story.
That's right.
But you got to know what's grandpa's motive, because he does have an agenda. And you got to know a little bit about the grandson, and to know a little bit more about their family, to know the inside jokes going on. Okay. So now I'm back to like understanding the nature of the writings, and it's not one size fits all. It's different genres. So that's a big conversation. That's really interesting stuff, in my opinion. Yeah. But that's going to help you read the Bible more. You wouldn't necessarily open up Genesis 1 and read the first several verses and think that that's poetry.
Right.
Because in our poetry, stuff rhymes and it's whatever.
It's roses are red and violets are blue,
but it is poetic.
It is. And
so it's a specific type of poem. Yeah. Which means a different type of points being made, other than maybe a 7-day creation that's 24 hours for 7 days. So he wasn't giving you science. He was giving you theology. Right. So I might end up down some rabbit trail that the writer of Genesis never intended for me to be on. And that's just one of many examples within the Bible. So I think the more you understand those is really, really helpful, and some fun discoveries and some things that at the end of the day you might go, yeah, I don't really know. I think it's probably 70% chance that, it's this and maybe it's that, but I'm, just that whole intrinsic reward of the process of walking it through. But then again, I would understand the genres, walk your way through it, and then start to collect multiple plausible ways of interpreting or looking at what you're reading, whether it's a story or a principle or an allegory, whatever it is. So I was talking to somebody the other day who went to a Christian college, which I did as well. And I've got nothing but love for those guys. I mean, I go back and give back to the school I came up from and graduated from. But what happens when you do that, right, is you have a 4-year, highly focused, concentrated education from extremely intelligent but very committed people to one interpretation. Yeah. So on, we'll say, making this up, hundreds of topics, we'll say 300 topics, you get you're thoroughly educated on one traditional interpretation of that. Right. Whereas there are multiple for each one of them, right? So you come out of this educational process with all the answers. Or you're ready to be an apologist. You're ready to be an evangelist for this way of thinking. But the reality is, nobody's got it all right. Come on, there's some other ways to look at it. I don't even know them really. They didn't teach me those things. They just teach you these. So now on my own, I go, well, okay, how else could I turn that prism? How else might that be interpreted? What else could it mean? And to be able to bring all of that in topic by topic. So, and again, that's a lifetime, man. It is. I love this day we live in, because when I came out of school, in 2003, I graduated from college. I had one big set of commentaries. That's all I could afford. And so when I was looking for an answer out of Acts 4, I went to that one set of commentaries and I said, what do they have to say? Well, man, I love it. Now I feel like a kid again, man. I feel like a student again. I'm going back, and now I can read all these different, things, and I can now wrestle with it and talk to you about it and phone a friend about it and pray about it and consider it and talk about it and then come to something I'm like, I really believe this. Yeah. And some of it is I'm doubling down on things that I've thought forever, and some of it's like opening and considering new things. How can you not want someone to do that? Yeah. I mean, I understand deconstruction, scary. It feels like someone's going to come blow up the stuff you spent your life building. Right. And some people are trying to do that, and that's fine. I'm not even thinking about that. I'm not worried about that. I like this journey. I invite people to do it in this way. I think you get a lot out of it. So let me summarize, because I just said a bunch.
That's all right. Go for it.
Pace. Okay. Don't be frenetic. Don't feel like it's unrealistic to think you're going to figure this out. You're not building Rome in a day. No, it's a lifetime of a long journey. And to do that. Second, do some academic learning around genres and the literature. When was it written? Who's the author? What was their motive? What was their intent? That's going to help you understand the Bible is not written to you. It was written for you, but not to you. So that's going to help you with, I think, more accuracy. And then from there, look at various interpretations, look at other ways of thinking about it, and then contemplate it, converse about it, talk about it, wrestle with it, and pray about it. Yeah. And then let those, some of those things you need to reopen. Yep. And don't let your feelings that you should be ashamed of yourself for asking sincere questions. Yeah. That's not right. Yeah. That's going to hold you back from some really incredible discoveries that you were meant to have, some of the most beautiful pieces of your journey. I think one of the points that you touched on just now that is super important that a lot of us miss is the historical and cultural context of things. I can't remember where you had heard this, but I remember you telling me you saw this somewhere at one point, 1,000 years from now, people aren't going to know the difference between a booty call and a butt dial. If you read that. Right. Right. And it's yeah, that's 100% applicable
when it comes to interpreting scripture, because it's not like there was this one common dialect throughout all of human history that we all speak the same shorthand, we all have the same colloquialisms, we all have the same like cadence to our communication. It's all different. And even within the Bible, you're talking about different times in human history, different cultures, different societal groups. And so what one group might be saying, you might read a scripture that because of who it was written to, it was kind of tongue in cheek and they all got it. And you just read it literal because you didn't understand that the difference between a butt dial and a booty call, and so you will live and die on a hill and you're completely wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think that understanding those concepts, what you said about like the forms of their poetry, or understanding like common sayings of a time or the cultural influence of a time. You'd been doing a series recently where you were talking about, during Jesus' day and like the time of the Roman Empire that they were living in, some of these Jewish groups and factions within Jewish society and the way that they approached the Roman Empire. And normally we don't think about those kind of things, and we read over certain words or groups like Pharisees, Sadducees, whatever, in scripture, and they're all kind of lumped together in our mind, and we know they're like kind of somehow rabbinical, I don't know, but people don't really know what it is. And when you start learning the history of it and you start breaking out the approach that each of these different groups had to things like Hellenism, their stance on the Roman Empire, then all of a sudden the shades to the story and the way it unfolds and the way you understand why they were at odds with Jesus or why they were at odds with each other makes so much more sense. Mm-hmm. And then even just how the events of Jesus' life unfold makes so much more sense. And people's reactions to him that we go, well, why would they do that? Well, now that makes sense too. So getting your hands on as much of that kind of information, and again, don't feel rushed. I love that you made that point because it's not like you have to figure it out tomorrow. But piece by piece, start putting more of those puzzle pieces together because you will see a far more complete picture. And it will be really meaningful to you. I think it's been an incredible journey.
So if you think about fictional stories, like TV shows or series of shows or movies, the best ones are complex characters. Mm-hmm. They're characters that you love one minute and you hate the next minute. They're characters that one moment they're the hero, and the next moment you're like, how could you? Yeah. And the reason that is so engaging is because that's real life. We are complex characters. Mm-hmm. And if you watched a movie and it was all one-dimensional characters, you got Cruella de Vil, who just wants to make
coats out of puppies.
Coats out of sweet little puppies. So she's just nothing but evil. Yeah. And then you got the hero over here who's nothing but good. I mean, it's a cute story, but that doesn't really do much other than kind of sort of entertain you.
Well, and think about what kind of stories, those very black and white stories, who are they for?
Children.
That's right.
To understand the basics of good and evil, right?
That's exactly right.
But the reality is as you get older, the nuance. Yeah, you look at Don Draper in Mad Men, and you're like, I don't know if I'm rooting for this guy or if I want him to cook, But then you can see yourself in complex characters because we all are that. Right. So the Bible, if I just go Pharisees are Cruella de Vil, right, and John the Baptist is a good guy, and you don't see all the complexity. Why are the Pharisees so dogmatic about the law? Why are they, when you look back and you see that through thousands of years, generation after generation, when the nation broke the law, broke the covenant, their judgment was another nation ruling them. Mm-hmm. And until they turned and got back to the basics and obedience and gave God what he wanted, they got no relief. Well, no wonder the Pharisees are like, what's wrong with you Sadducees and you Herodians and all you people that are Hellenized? You are why Rome is here.
Right.
And if we want God to deliver us, we have to do what's been true with the Amalekites and the Jebusites and the Philistines.
That's right.
And
it feels like 2 + 2 = 4.
So what is there to be confused about? So you guys are the enemy because you are the reason why we're in this position.
Yeah.
Okay. So with all of that, now I don't just think the Pharisees are Cruella de Vil, puppy coat makers. I go, they make sense. Now Jesus is going to show up to those guys who make sense, and he's going to have a problem with them. And he is going to go at them in terms of their hypocrisy and how judgmental they are. And the fact that they dump heavy weight on people and don't help them lift it.
That's right.
And how they view other people. He's going to go at all that, right? But when I understand more of the context, I understand how they got to their thought process and why they saw the world the way they do. Now I don't, it's not a Disney cartoon anymore. Now it's a complex character that I can relate to.
Yep.
That I can also apply to my life, myself, my marriage, my work environment. And that's again where I think the Bible now comes alive. And instead of it being reduced, I think now you're treating it the way it's supposed to be treated.
Right. And here's even another layer on top of that. You think about the fact that when Jesus was born, and there was this massacre of baby boys. It was 2 and under, right? Was the age range in these communities where Jesus was from, because the king at that time had heard that the new king of the Jews is come, and so he's wanting to wipe him off the map. Jesus manages to escape, but there are who knows how many countless baby boys that were killed under that edict. And so now
in that same place, right?
In that same place. And so now Jesus, who, his family had taken him to Egypt for safety, they come back, they're raised in that same community, and everyone's looking at him going, your kid's still alive. I would have had a son that's 30 right now, but my son was ripped from my arms and killed right in front of me as a baby. My son would have been doing these things. And so you got to think about the level of pain that some of these people have. And then when Jesus starts proclaiming himself as the Messiah, he starts, people
talking about a kingdom, the
talking,
kingdom of heaven,
talking
the
about
kingdom
a
of
kingdom.
God.
That's right. People start saying, this is the King of the Jews. This is the man that we've been waiting for. Then they go, oh, so you're the reason my kid's dead. Okay. And you can imagine how some of these people who maybe are now the age where, some of them are part of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, whatever, right? And they have these holes in their heart from this horrible trauma that they've been through. And now Jesus has basically identified himself as the reason you went through that trauma. You can imagine the reaction that some people would have out of a place of such deep hurt. So you start adding, like you said, the layers and the layers and the layers of human experience, of real, this didn't all take place in a vacuum. This isn't what was it, like the Truman Show or whatever, right? Where it's like this set up thing. This was real life with all of these other extenuating circumstances happening around, and thousands of years of cultural experience, and the wars that were happening in your time, and the kingdoms that were rising and falling. And when you start putting all of that context around it, it makes your picture make so much sense. So,
yeah. You think about the one who was so threatened by the new king of the Jews to the point that he was willing to kill baby boys. He died when Jesus was a toddler, but Herod Antipas who is his son, is alive and well, and he just decapitated John the Baptist.
That's right.
So you're going, this whole kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God,
this is risky
new
stuff.
kingdom. There's
You're
a new
bringing
kingdom.
things
I have
into
good
our
news.
community.
There's a new kingdom.
Yeah.
Oh.
Maybe stop
you can-
saying that because you're
well,
bringing the Romans down on us.
You can understand, again, the impact that some of those people would have. Now, again, I'm not saying the kingdom of heaven isn't a good thing or that we shouldn't follow Jesus. I'm just saying
Right.
when you
It's
start to
giving you
paint the picture
understanding. Right.
of the world, it gives you a better understanding for what you're reading in the Gospels, right?
That's right.
So again, we probably said enough. I don't know. I mean, if you have more questions, I'm glad to talk about it. But.
No, so just a couple more things on like the tool front, because I think this is something that a lot of people feel like kind of compelled to do, but also unprepared to do in a lot of ways. You know, they feel like, I have questions, I just don't even know how to look for answers. How would I even find all of this stuff that you're talking about? So one of the things you mentioned on a past episode that I think is really helpful, and I encourage people, we don't have to go fully into it right now. I encourage you to go back to this episode. We can link which episode it was in the show notes for you. But you talked about the Wesleyan quadrilateral. And I think that will help people have like a process and a system for working through some of these things. Do read commentaries. Do read some historical narratives that help you get a fuller picture. What else would you say are some things that people can do?
Yeah, so I would say some of that is dependent on where you're at right now. So like if you feel like you're kind of starting from scratch, I think some of the best resources out there are like the Bible Project.
Great one.
Bible Project is
Really good.
I think phenomenal. It's
Simple, clear.
yeah. So every book of the Bible, they do we'll say an 8 to 10 minute survey of that book.
The themes, the
themes,
characters.
and it's physically illustrated beautifully.
Yeah. It's
So
very engaging.
The word pictures like that they use, and then the physical pictures really help connect the dots. So like I have a degree in all this stuff, but I go back and watch those. Like if I'm to freshen up my mind on a book of the Bible that I'm studying or whatever, I use it all the time.
Yeah.
And then if you go to their website, BibleProject.com, I believe it is, they have even more content around other types of questions. So it's not just, Genesis through Revelation summaries. They have good stuff. Again, they're all relatively short videos, 5, 7, 8 minutes, but on different biblical topics around, well, what is the kingdom of God and what is the kingdom of heaven? And, what was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil or whatever, like
right.
more of those. And they're putting out new stuff all the time. So I would definitely encourage people, especially if you're, no matter where you're at, but especially if you're starting out to go there.
You won't be overwhelmed by it. I think that's what's wonderful about that. I think there are some other resources that could kind of leave you feeling brain fried at first.
That's why I say it depends on where you're starting from. So if you feel like, if you're like, hey, I'm a little further down the road there, and you're wanting some stuff you can, like in terms of resources that you can kind of control, so to speak, like Logos Bible software.
Okay.
You can download. They have several packages, like from the basic package to platinum or whatever it is, probably a couple $1,000s or something, down to a couple $100. You can download all that stuff. They're updating it all the time, but that gives you things like Hebrew lexicon, and then multiple commentaries. So when you're studying verses, you can go in, but there's free stuff like the Bible Hub, BibleHub.com. You could go, you look up a verse, and then right there underneath the verse, it has, if you want to see it in Greek or you want to see it in Hebrew,
right.
or again, they have commentaries linked there as well. So BibleGateway.com, same thing.
The Bible app allows you to read things in multiple different translations, and also gives some commentary on there as well.
Yeah. So I would say those 4 Bible Hub, BibleGateway.com, the Bible Project,
and Logos.
And Logos. I think those, I mean, you have a lot.
Yeah.
You know? And then I think, you listen to, you'll find people, you kind of chase threads, you listen to conversation. I mean, you'll find people that, are able to speak to you and get interested on a topic and start finding out what all's out there, put in the search engine, see what's out there.
I think one of the best and most simple ways that I've heard it said is just approaching the Bible not with my expectation of what it says or what I want it to say, but just opening it up and actually seeing what does it have to say to me. It don't come with a preconceived notion.
Yeah, I think of it like if you and I were detectives and something happened in this room and maybe it was a crime or something, right? And we showed up. If we showed up to this crime scene and we had heard rumor that somebody was accusing
Scott,
somebody
the
was
director
accusing our
over there.
friend Scott of, doing something bad in this room, right? And we're like,
always Scott. Always.
And so we're like, well, we can't let that happen to Scott, right? So we come in, and so we would show up to this room with a presupposition or an agenda that Scott didn't do it. And so everything we found, we kind of swept under the rug or we ignored or whatever because we want Scott to be innocent.
That's right.
But if we're like, we want the truth. And if Scott did it, we're going to prove it, and if he didn't do it, we're going to prove it. But we're going to find every fingerprint. We're going to
every
look
shred
at
of
the
evidence.
We're going to do all this stuff. And we want to look at this room and find out what story actually happened here, what's being said. And so I think if you take that true detective mentality when you're going in versus the guy who's planting evidence.
That's right.
or doesn't want something to be true. And that's where I think you got to wrestle those things internally so that I can approach this thing in the right way to go, what is being told? What is being taught? And that mentality, I think, will get you to more truth and probably some stuff that's right in front of you that you'll be able to see better.
Well, I think you've given people some really incredible stuff to start this process with. I appreciate everybody asking that. I know that's a tough topic, and I appreciate you taking it on because, like you said, it is such a broad thing to try to tackle. But I think you gave people a really great jumping off point and some really good kind of guidelines to help you get where you need to go. Also, feel free to shoot more questions if you have them. I mean, we're not necessarily going to give you, a concrete answer to certain biblical things that you want to know, because I think you need to do some of that discovery for yourself. But if you have more questions about how to even tackle this process, we'd be happy to help you with that.
Yeah, we talk broadly about how to approach it, but if there are specific questions on specific things that you guys would ever want to talk about, or I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, we might have a little Bible rapid fire episode for you down the line or something.
Put me in the hot seat.
That's a real hot seat. Yeah. You'd be ready for it though.
Well,
That's something else that people should know about you. It is amazing to see you in a hot seat situation like that, and the way that your brain just goes into rapid fire mode, and you can absolutely, you cannot be stumped. You cannot. It just doesn't
I'm also
happen.
not afraid to plead the fifth or to call a timeout. I need to come back. Let's table that.
You are incredible at that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that just in in regards to scripture, but in general, you are really, really good in those situations where maybe you're sitting in front of a group of students or something like that, and you're able to just pull stuff out for them, really, really good stuff. So,
well, thank you. That's nice thing of you to say.
So, kind of a reminder for anybody that doesn't remember the context of this show, but I bring something every week that Greg doesn't know what we're going to talk about. So he is not prepped for this. So, I mean, let that just even kind of be an example this week of you just had all that in there. So you have a beautiful mind, sir. Thank you for sharing it with us.
You do too. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. We love you guys. Have a good week.